Do you think slasher films are just entertainment? What if I told you that the most famous masked killers from our screens might be based on something far more disturbing? Something carefully hidden from public knowledge, something still happening today. In 2006, a documentary film called Behind the Mask was released, purporting to follow an aspiring serial killer named Leslie Vernon as he prepared for a killing spree. Critics praised it as clever horror satire. Audiences laughed at its meta-commentary on slasher films. Everyone assumed it was fiction. They were wrong. The film was a carefully constructed cover-up, a smokescreen. The real Leslie Vernon case had been systematically erased from public record, replaced with a fictional narrative that would seem too absurd to investigate. But the truth remains, buried in sealed police files, redacted government documents, and the traumatized memories of those who survived. I've spent the last 4 years tracking the actual case through newspaper archives, interviewing witnesses who wish to remain anonymous, and piecing together fragments of evidence that someone has worked very hard to destroy. What I found will change how you understand not just Behind the Mask, but every slasher film you've ever seen. It began in 1971 in the small agricultural community of Glen Echo, Maryland. A farming accident claimed the life of a 7-year-old boy named Leslie Manuso. At least, that's what official records claimed. According to the death certificate, Leslie fell into a threshing machine while playing in his father's barn. His body was reportedly so mangled that the funeral was closed. Casket. No photographs exist of the remains. No autopsy was performed. The case was quickly closed. 3 weeks later, a local teenager reported seeing a small figure in the Mancuso's orchard at twilight. The boy was described as wearing tattered overalls, standing perfectly still among the trees. When the teenager approached, the figure vanished. The incident was dismissed as grief hallucination. Understandable, expected. Except for one detail that wasn't included in the police report I found in county archives. The teenager insisted that the boy's face wasn't a face at all. Just smooth, blank skin stretched over a skull. By winter of 1971, 4 more sightings were reported. Each time, the small figure was standing at the edge of the Mancuso property. Each time, closer to the neighboring houses. Each time, described with that same smooth, featureless face. Local parents began keeping their children indoors after sunset. The family doctor prescribed sedatives to half the town. Everyone was seeing things, they were told. Mass hysteria following a child's tragic death, nothing more. On February 8, 1972, David Keene, a 15-year-old neighbor of the Mancusos, disappeared while walking home from a friend's house. His path would have taken him directly past the Mancuso orchard. A search party was organized. Dogs tracked his scent to the edge of the property but refused to enter, whining and backing away. Police found nothing. No body, no blood. No signs of struggle. David Keene was listed as a runaway. 2 days later, Leslie's father, Michael Mancuso, took his own life. He was found hanging in the same barn where his son supposedly died. The suicide note, which was sealed by local authorities and only referenced in a single newspaper clipping, I discovered in the Glen Echo Historical Society archives, allegedly contained just 4 words. He came back wrong. The remaining Mancuso family, Leslie's mother and infant sister, moved away immediately after the funeral. County records show they relocated to a town called Cherry Falls in Virginia. I found no further record of them after 1974. Their house in Glen Echo remained vacant for years, falling into disrepair as locals spread rumors of strange noises from the orchard, lights moving in the abandoned barn, and a small figure occasionally seen standing in the upstairs window of Leslie's former bedroom. In October 1980, a group of teenagers broke into the Mancuso house on Halloween night on a dare. According to police reports that were later removed from public access, but which I obtained through a former deputy who kept personal copies, the teens fled the house in hysterics. One had suffered deep lacerations across his back, like claw marks, the medical report noted. Another was found 2 miles away, walking in a state of catatonia along the highway. When she finally spoke 3 days later, she would only say, "His face isn't right. His face isn't there." The incident was blamed on drug use and teenage hysteria. The house was demolished the following month. The orchard was cut down. The barn burned under suspicious circumstances. The Mancuso property was divided and sold to developers. A subdivision now stands where those events took place. None of the current residents know the history of their neighborhood, but something unusual happened during construction. In April 1985, workers digging the foundation for a new home discovered a child-sized burlap mask buried 6 feet deep in the soil. The mask was crude, eye holes cut unevenly, mouth sewn shut, stained with what might have been blood. It was logged as evidence but disappeared from the police station that night. The officer on duty reported hearing a child's laughter just before the power went out. When the lights returned, the mask was gone. He resigned the following day and reportedly moved to Alaska, refusing to ever discuss the incident. For nearly a decade, the trail went cold. The legend of Leslie Manuso became just another local ghost story told by teenagers at slumber parties. But in 1994, a series of murders began in a small Virginia town called Forest Green. 6 counselors at a summer camp were killed over the course of 2 nights. Their bodies were arranged in grotesque tableaus, mimicking scenes from popular slasher films. The killer was never caught. Local police files, which I gained access to through a Freedom of Information Act request that was initially denied but later approved after appeal, contain witness statements from 2 survivors describing their attacker as small in stature and wearing a burlap mask. One reported that when the mask briefly slipped during a struggle, there was nothing underneath, no features, just smooth skin. This detail was redacted from public reports. The FBI file on the case was sealed in 1996 under unusual circumstances, with the official explanation citing national security concerns. National security for a summer camp massacre. Between 1994 and 2005, similar killings occurred in 7 different states. Each followed the same pattern: isolated location, young victims, bodies staged in references to horror films, and at least one survivor describing a small figure in a burlap mask. In each case, local authorities initially investigated, only to have federal agents assume jurisdiction and classify the files. In each case, media coverage mysteriously diminished within days of the incidents. In each case, witnesses later recanted their statements or simply disappeared. Then came Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon in 2006, a supposedly fictional mockumentary about a serial killer explaining his craft. The filmmaker, Scott Glosserman, claimed it was an original concept exploring slasher film tropes, but anonymous sources within the production have suggested otherwise. One crew member, who contacted me through an encrypted email that was later deleted, claimed that the script arrived mysteriously, with financing attached from a shell company that couldn't be traced. Another reported unusual government observers on set, describing themselves as technical consultants, but offering no specific expertise. What's most disturbing is how the film correlates with actual case files I've uncovered. The methods described by the fictional Leslie Vernon match exactly those used in the unsolved killings between 1994 and 2005. Details that were never released to the public, information that only the killer or investigating officers could have known. Consider this. In the Forest Green murders, the killer disabled the electrical system in a specific sequence that created a 3-minute delay before backup generators activated. In Behind the Mask, Leslie Vernon describes this exact technique, down to the color coding of the wires that need to be cut. This information wasn't public. It wasn't even in most of the sealed police files. It was contained in a single forensic electrician's report that was classified immediately after submission. After the film's release, the killings stopped. At least, they stopped following the same pattern. Instead, copycat crimes began appearing. Murders that mimicked the fictional Leslie Vernon rather than the actual classified cases. It's as if the film served dual purposes: to hide the truth in plain sight by fictionalizing it, and to provide new inspiration for disturbed individuals who would draw attention away from the original pattern. In 2008, Nathan Basil, the actor who portrayed Leslie Vernon, gave an interview to a horror magazine in which he described strange occurrences during filming, Props moving between takes, equipment failures when certain scenes were shot, a persistent feeling of being watched. The interview was never published. The magazine's editor told me they received a cease and desist letter from an unmarked government office. Nathan Basil has done few interviews since and refuses to discuss the film in detail. More telling is what happened to people who investigated the real cases. Journalist Rebecca Weiss was working on a book connecting the series of murders when she disappeared in 2010. Her apartment was found meticulously clean. Too clean, according to the detective who first entered the scene. Like it had been sanitized, he told me, before refusing further comment. Her research materials, computer, and notes were all gone. The case remains open, but inactive. Dr. Martin Keller, a criminologist who published a paper noting similarities between the unsolved cases, died in what was ruled a hiking accident in 2012. His body was found at the bottom of a ravine in the Cascades. The autopsy reported the cause of death as blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. What wasn't reported was that, according to the park ranger who discovered him, Keller's face appeared to have been smoothed away. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank skin. The ranger's statement was taken but never included in official reports. He was later diagnosed with PTSD and took early retirement. In 2015, a storage unit rented under a false name was discovered in Baltimore containing newspaper clippings of each murder, along with items taken from the victims, jewelry, ID cards, personal effects that had been reported missing from the crime scenes. Also found were dozens of burlap masks in various stages of completion and a journal written in what forensic analysts described as the handwriting of a child. The journal was confiscated by unnamed federal agents before local police could properly document it. The storage facility's security camera footage from the previous 6 months was corrupted beyond recovery. What happened to the real Leslie Manuso? If he died in 1971, who or what has been committing these murders? If he didn't die, where has he been all these years? And why does he remain physically small, as if never aging beyond childhood? Government files I've accessed through various means contain references to something called Project Rebirth, initiated in 1970 and officially terminated in 1972. The project's stated purpose was redacted, but remaining documentation mentions juvenile subjects and consciousness transfer experiments. One partially redacted report includes the phrase, "Subject demonstrated continued animated functions despite catastrophic physical trauma," followed by several blacked-out pages. Was Leslie Manuso part of this experiment? Did something go wrong with the consciousness transfer they were attempting? Is that what his father meant by, "he came back wrong"? The most recent development came just last year. A family purchased a home in the subdivision built on the former Manuso property. Their 8-year-old daughter began speaking of a boy with no face who visited her at night. Parents assumed it was a nightmare until they found small footprints in the mud outside her window. Child-sized, but with unusual depth and weight distribution, suggesting something much heavier than a child. The family moved out 3 weeks later. The house remains vacant. Local teenagers now dare each other to spend the night there. 3 have tried. 2 came home with identical scratches on their backs. The third hasn't been seen since October 31st, 2025. The police report lists him as a runaway. His parents have stopped speaking to the media. His room remains exactly as he left it, door locked, window nailed shut from the outside. What connects these events over more than 5 decades? Why has there been such coordinated effort to obscure and fictionalize them? Who benefits from transforming the real Leslie Vernon case into entertainment? The answer may lie in our collective relationship with horror. Consider the timing. The original incidents occurred just as slasher films were becoming a cultural phenomenon. Each subsequent killing spree happened shortly before major horror film releases. The pattern suggests something feeding on, or perhaps generating, our fear. Folk legends across cultures describe entities that grow stronger when believed in, that are sustained by human attention and emotion. What if Leslie Vernon, whatever he is now, requires not just victims but an audience? What if the film was not meant to hide him but to strengthen him by spreading his story? What if each viewing, each retelling, each moment of fear experienced by an audience member provides sustenance? You're part of it now. By reading this account, you've invited Leslie Vernon into your awareness. You've opened the door, watching, waiting. The smooth-faced boy has many names across different regions. Leslie Vernon is just one identity he's worn. In New England, he's known as the blank child. In the Midwest, the faceless farmhand. In the Pacific Northwest, the hollow-face killer, always small in stature. Always wearing a mask that, when removed, reveals nothing human underneath. Since beginning this investigation, I've experienced strange occurrences. Footprints outside my apartment, files rearranged on my desk when I returned from getting coffee. At night, I sometimes wake to the sound of a child's laughter, though I live alone. Once, I glimpsed a small figure standing in the corner of my bedroom, gone when I turned on the light. My research notes have disappeared and reappeared in different locations. The recordings of my witness interviews contain unexplained whispers between responses. Last week, I found a small, crude burlap mask on my pillow. I didn't touch it. I left my apartment immediately and stayed with a friend. When I returned with police the next day, the mask was gone. They found nothing unusual, suggested it was stress-induced hallucination, but the officer kept looking at the corners of the room, as if expecting to see something watching from the shadows. As they were leaving, he asked if I'd been hearing a child's laughter. I didn't answer. He nodded as if my silence was confirmation, then advised me to stay with my friend for a few more days. He didn't file a report. The pattern is escalating again. 3 college students disappeared last month while filming a documentary about abandoned properties in Glen Echo. Their equipment was found at the edge of what used to be the Mancuso orchard, cameras intact but memory cards missing. The last text message sent from one of their phones read simply, "His face isn't right." The Behind the Mask film is experiencing a resurgence in popularity through streaming services. Comment sections are filled with viewers reporting strange experiences after watching, noises in their homes, glimpses of small figures in peripheral vision, dreams of a child with no face. Most assume these are pranks or the power of suggestion. They aren't looking closely enough. The timestamps on these comments cluster around 3:33 a.m., regardless of time zone. Many come from accounts that have no other activity before or since. What happens when enough people know about Leslie Vernon? What happens when the boundary between fiction and reality dissolves completely? What is he building toward? I believe we're approaching another cycle of actual killings, not just the manufactured copycats that followed the film's release. The pattern suggests a major event is coming. Reports of missing children are increasing in areas connected to previous incidents. Each disappearance has been explained away. Runaways, custody disputes, tragic accidents. Authorities aren't connecting the dots because someone is ensuring they can't see the pattern. If you've read this far, you need to be aware of certain signs, small footprints that sink deeper than they should, the smell of orchard blossoms out of season, the sound of threshing machines in the distance where none exist, children speaking of a new friend with no face or a smooth face, cold spots in the house that move from room to room, and most importantly, burlap fibers found in unexpected places, on pillowcases, caught in door frames, under windowsills. I'm sharing this information against the advice of those still willing to speak with me. 2 days ago, I received an anonymous call warning me to stop my investigation. The voice was distorted, but the message was clear. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some truths are meant to stay hidden. When I asked why, the response chilled me. Because he's listening. Always listening. And he wants an audience. The most disturbing possibility is that Leslie Vernon, whatever entity wears that name, is evolving. Early accounts describe a mindless, vengeful presence. Later incidents show complex planning and psychological manipulation. Recent evidence suggests an intelligence that understands how to use media and technology to spread its influence. What if these aren't just killings but a form of recruitment? What if each telling of his story creates more vessels for whatever force animates him? I've now found references to similar entities in folklore from around the world, figures that begin as human but transform through trauma into something that exists in the boundaries between reality and nightmare. Many cultures have rituals specifically designed to prevent such transformations, specific burial practices for children who die violently, ceremonies to close the door that might allow their return. The Mancuso family, according to county records, opted against traditional funeral services for their son. No religious officials were present at the burial. The door was left open. For those concerned, they might be experiencing Leslie Vernon phenomena. I've found only one consistent method of protection mentioned across various sources. Refuse to believe while simultaneously refusing to disbelieve. Maintain skepticism without dismissal. Acknowledge the possibility without accepting its reality. This paradoxical state of mind creates a barrier that such entities allegedly cannot cross. Though I've tried to maintain this mental state throughout my investigation, I fear it's too late for me. The incidents are increasing in frequency. Last night, I found small, muddy footprints leading to my bed, stopping abruptly at the edge as if something had stood there watching me sleep. My research notes keep rearranging themselves into a child's crude drawings. The power in my building fails regularly now, always for exactly 3 minutes. If something happens to me, this account may be the only warning that remains. I've sent copies to multiple sources with instructions to publish simultaneously. Some copies will likely be intercepted. Some sources may be coerced into silence. But the truth only needs one path to reach you. You might be thinking this is just another creepypasta, another internet horror story designed to unsettle you briefly before you move on to other content. I understand the skepticism. It's safer to believe that. Perhaps it's even the protection I mentioned, that paradoxical state of neither fully believing nor disbelieving. But ask yourself this. Why do we keep making the same horror films? Why do the same patterns of fictional killers persist across decades? What if they're not just stories, but warnings? What if the boundary between the screen and reality is more permeable than we've been led to believe? If you've seen Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, watch it again with this knowledge. Notice the background details that don't serve the fictional narrative. The documents briefly visible on walls, the coordinates mentioned in passing conversation, the symbols carved into door frames. These aren't filmmaking errors. They're breadcrumbs left by someone trying to reveal truth through fiction. The entity known as Leslie Vernon feeds on attention, but requires belief to materialize fully. Each retelling strengthens it. Each moment of fear provides sustenance. Each viewing of its fictionalized story creates another thin spot in the barrier between its reality and ours. So why am I telling you this? Why risk strengthening it further? Because contained within the pattern is also the solution. The entity follows rules, twisted, malevolent rules, but rules nonetheless. Understanding those rules may be our only defense as its influence spreads. I believe I've found a pattern to the killings, a mathematical progression that predicts the next cycle. If I'm correct, we have less than a month before Leslie Vernon claims new victims. The location will be somewhere with connections to both the original Glen Echo incident and one of the subsequent killing sites. The targeted group will match the profile from previous attacks. Young people isolated from immediate help, engaged in some activity related to horror or fear. Watch for news reports that don't quite make sense. Watch for stories that disappear from headlines too quickly. Watch for small details that connect to what I've shared here. And most importantly, watch for a small figure in your peripheral vision, standing too still, waiting for you to notice it fully. If you've made it this far, you're already involved. You've already opened yourself to awareness of Leslie Vernon. You might feel a chill as you read these words. You might sense something watching you. That's how it begins. Leave a comment below with the phrase, "I see you," if you've read this entire account. It serves two purposes: to help me track how many people have been exposed to this information, and to acknowledge the entity directly, the paradoxical protection I mentioned, neither fully believing nor disbelieving, but acknowledging the possibility. What you do with this information is your choice. You can dismiss it as fiction, you can investigate further, you can spread the warning or keep it to yourself. But remember, Leslie Vernon is watching what you choose. Always watching, always waiting. His face isn't right, his face isn't there, and now he knows your face too.